Welcome to the Lighthouse Financial Advisors Money Over 50 podcast with Dallas Davison and Michael Hogue. This information is general in nature and does not take into account your objectives, financial situation, or needs. Therefore, you should consider whether the information is appropriate for you and your personal circumstances. If you require personal advice, please contact Lighthouse Financial Advisors. Here are your hosts, Dallas Davison and Michael Hogue.
Welcome everyone to today's topic of Money Over 50. Today's topic is financial stress versus financial problems. Dallas, you've recently read a book called How to Worry Less About Money. Can you tell us about the main plot of that book, or the main theory? It's probably a better one.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I recently read this book called How to Worry Less About Money, and it's the main point that it made. It sounds a bit self-helpy, and it sounds like someone who's going to jump in and say you should do this and you should do that with your money. The point that it made, which is something that we actually see a lot with our clients, is that there's actually sort of two different components to what we think of as money problems or financial problems. Is that there's the actual problem itself, and then there's just financial stress around those problems or about those decisions. So that's, I guess, the one of the main points there is to break down is that in most cases your financial problem is not really a problem, because it's not like there's a problem that can be solved. It's more around the feeling or the emotion of how people think and feel about money. And as we all know, money is a very emotional topic, and it's one that we've seen a lot where if you approach the problems that our clients come to us with, or the issues that they raise, if you approach them through the issue of a problem to be solved, or something where we'll have a magic answer that will make them feel better, a lot of the time it doesn't work like that, because the issue is not necessarily the problem itself, it's how they feel about that and how they think about that. So an example here that I guess of the one that we see is an amount of money. If someone has enough money to meet all of their living expenses, and they don't really have a financial problem, but if they've previously had $10 million and now they have $3 million, even if they have enough money to live on, they normally don't feel good about the fact that they've just lost $7 million. It's normally, and that's an example of one where it's a financial stress thing, not a financial problem thing. So if you sit down with that person and say, hey, look, I know you lost $7 million, but it's okay because you've still got plenty and you've got enough to live on and it's all good, they're normally not just going to shrug it off and say, oh yeah, you're right, that's fine. So there's a few components of it, or there's a few different, areas where we see this, where it tends to be things that are not necessarily a problem that can be solved until you break down exactly what the source of the problem or the stress is. So the big one is people saying I don't have enough money, or I won't have enough money to retire. Is that one you see a fair bit, Michael?
Look, it is, yeah. So the back to the main premise of the book is there's financial stress and there's financial problems.
Yeah.
So am I right in assuming that we would say a financial problem is that someone would say, look, I want to retire as soon as possible and I need to live off roughly $50,000 per annum in retirement. So
yeah,
that's a problem that can or can't be solved, or it can be solved just over a period of time.
That's right. Versus
the financial stress and financial stress is more of a feeling or an anxiety level of I don't have enough.
Yeah.
Or I'm worried that I don't have enough. Is that correct?
That's how I kind of thought of it after reading this book, is to think about it and go, sometimes you tend to find in your financial planning study, for example, there's all these case studies you get given where someone walks in and says, I would like to retire in 6.5 years and draw this amount of income and do this and do that, and I would also like to have a $30,000 holiday next year. And your job as the financial planner is seen as, oh, okay, well, I'll just make all those bits work in together. And that's kind of where the theory is that someone comes to you with a financial problem and you solve the problem and they pat you on the back and away you go. When, as you say, there's a big difference between someone saying, I want to retire on X amount of dollars in X amount of years, and someone saying, I'm worried I don't have enough for retirement.
That's that makes sense now. So the main, like, people coming to see me for the first time, most of the time can't identify a financial problem. So they say words to the effect of, like, I want to retire, or I'm feeling I want to retire soon. Or if you ask them when they say I want to retire, and you say, when do you want to retire? They say yesterday. Most commonly say. But when you break it down, most of those people have just started thinking about their retirement. They're usually around mid-50s. And what they're really hinting at is that they're starting to worry now about retiring at age 65, and if they'll have enough, and if they're doing everything in their power to do that. So it is a general feeling. I haven't read this book, so I've just read Dallas's overview here, so I'm learning as we go as well. But I can see now that most people come to us with a stress,
not a problem,
and then we break it down and say, okay, well,
it sounds bad to go. They come to us with a stress and we make it a problem, which is not ideal. But
the problem still exists. But it's an unknown problem, I guess, at that point in time.
And this is, I guess, the difference is once we. What I see as a big part of our role is if someone comes to us with an unquantifiable stress or a source of anxiety in their life, we can't fix that, or we can't solve that until we know what is the actual problem that needs to be solved. And that's, in most cases in our first appointment, a lot of that time is just spent getting to the crux of the issue of, okay, well, what is the issue that we're trying to fix here, or the problem that we need to solve? And it sometimes takes an hour to work out what do people mean by the topics they've raised. And it's like I say, it's not a situation where people don't want to tell you because they want to keep it a secret. It's normally that the feelings or the thoughts that they've had around retirement, as a good example, they've never really sat down and quantified what that would mean to them. And that's where I really find the enough money thing is an interesting thought experiment, because that's everyone's fear is, I won't have enough money, or I don't have enough money. And then when you raise the question of, okay, well, what does enough money mean? You tend to get a blank look. And it's a bit like a study I read recently where they said, if you ever ask someone how much money they need to be happy, it tends to be around 2 to 3 times the amount of money they have now. So it doesn't matter whether they've got $100,000 or $100 million. It's always that next step and the next step that we think is enough. But once you can break it down and say, well, this is what that means to me, we can then get started on working towards fixing the actual problem.
That's a good point, because I've certainly encountered that in the past as well. Like, people, no matter how much they have in financial resources, they feel that it's not enough generally. I feel that generally.
And that's, I guess, from an evolutionary point of view, it makes sense, because if you're a caveman and you go hunting that day and you get some food, you don't normally want to just sit back with your feet up and go, oh well, that's enough now, I'm sorted, because you have to go and find food again tomorrow. Whereas when it comes to financial resources, we still have that same attitude of I need to keep looking for more and more and more, when in reality that's not the world we live in. There is a point in time at which you can go, okay, I do have enough and I'm happy with that, and I don't feel the need to stress about it and worry about needing more.
So following on from the theories, once a financial problem has been not solved, but it's on the way to being solved, Are there studies that have shown that reduces financial stress? I mean, I would imagine that it does. But
Well, it's an interesting one because if you think about this from the perspective of, we've discussed this with our clients where, and everyone's kind of probably experienced this to some degree, where if you've got financial stress of, I'm worried I don't have enough money, and when I have $1 million, then I'll have enough. The minute you have $1 million, all that happens is your stress goes from, I'm worried I don't have enough money, to, I'm worried I'm going to lose this money. So there's a component there of, it's a constant battle of trying to diagnose what is it that I'm actually worried about, what is it that I'm stressed about, and what do I need to do to solve that problem. We see that there's all sorts of interesting things that you see over time with that, of that as people are tracking towards reaching the point that they've said, that's my goal and that's what I want to achieve. There's a component even that we see sometimes of self-sabotage, where people that are well on their way to achieving their goal, they're not used to having what feels like enough money to them, or what they would diagnose as enough money. People will sometimes go out of their way to try and wreck that, or to try and find a way to get rid of that money, so that they're back to a comfort level of what they're used to. So it can be a really interesting one, as you're saying, as that someone comes to you with a financial stress or a concern or an issue or some sort of anxiety around money. You diagnose that and break that down to what is the problem. Then you fix the problem, or you get on your way to fixing the problem. And I guess if you're not careful, all that happens is that amorphous stress of, I'm worried about money, moves to the next thing. And it might be, I'm worried I'm going to lose it, or I'm worried that the money will change me, or something like that. There's all sorts of things that I think that most human beings are wired to have some level of stress around money, and that's the level that we're at. So we can diagnose a problem, then we can fix a problem. But if we're just used to having that level of stress and we haven't actually really worked through that, you just push that across onto the next thing and onto the next thing. So.
But you'd rather be stressed and have the problem solved than be stressed with the problem not solved.
Exactly right. And that's, I guess, the part of it is, it's just a matter of working through those things as they come up. Is that the first problem is generally, I'm worried I don't have enough money, and then you solve that problem. As you said, it's better to be looking at it than looking for it. You do still have the same issue of, okay, well, I'm worried that now that I have enough to retire, I'm worried I'm going to lose it, or something's going to go wrong. Those are all things that, again, though, you can just work through that and go, well, what does that mean when you say you're worried that you'll lose that? How would that happen? How do we break that down into a problem that can actually be solved?
So for the listeners, Dallas, and for the listeners that are thinking that they're stressed or that they have a financial problem, is there anything that they should be looking at now?
Well, I think as I say to some of my clients, the easy thing is to just dump all your worries onto me. And so I say to people, that's what you're paying me to stress about this so that you don't have to. But realistically, the first step there is to, I guess what I've thought about here is to think about all the things that you think of as your money problems. And then if you go through these and follow through your reasoning and work out, is that a real problem, or is it just a cause of stress? And when I say is it a real problem, is it something that can be solved, or is it just a source of anxiety for you? So basically, if it's a problem that can be fixed, that's kind of easier to some degree, because like we say, it's no point then sitting on the proverbial therapist couch and talking about your feelings and thinking about it. If there's a problem that needs to be fixed, you can just fix the problem. And it may be that you don't have the technical knowledge to do that yourself, but once that's diagnosed, you can get the assistance from someone that you need to actually solve that issue. If it's not really something that's a problem that can be fixed, then it's a bit harder, because it's really just about going, well, you probably need to think about, sounds a bit woo-woo, but think about how you think about that, if that makes sense. And to some degree, a lot of that comes back to, and we talk about this with our clients all the time, is their attitude towards money over the last 50 years, or even the household that they were raised in. How did their how did their family talk about money, and how did they think about money, and how does that kind of affect them? And that's, like I say, if your money problem is actually something that you can directly link to, well, this was an issue or a source of stress when I was a kid or a young adult or something like that 30 years ago, it's probably not actually the problem that is the issue at heart. It's really about the feelings around that.
So I see that a lot with some of my clients who are getting ready to retire. They have rental properties.
Yeah.
And they owe an amount on the rental property. The rental property, they purchase it for more than they can sell it now.
Yeah.
And we look at getting ready to retire, which it's prudent to retire all of your debt.
Yeah.
And you know, we come to the conclusion, and they come to the conclusion as well, that the rental property needs to be sold.
Yeah.
Now, it's not a problem because they
know what
clearly have enough to retire with their superannuation, and what but it becomes a stress.
Yes.
It becomes a real stress because they have purchased it for more, and no one likes to sell something that they've paid more for.
Yeah.
However, in the grand scheme of things,
yeah,
they're better off just ripping it off like a band-aid and selling it and paying off the remaining loan, and then carrying forward the rest of the money. And but it becomes a real stress for them to be able to do that.
That's a really good example of one where, and as the financial advisor, as the person that's sort of removed from that situation, if you don't have the emotional, the feeling around that and about that decision, then there's probably something where, if they're a couple, one of them really wanted to buy the property and one of them didn't, and they're constantly, it's been an ongoing thing for 5 or 10 years. And if we approach that with the thought of, well, there's a problem here, which is we need to get to the position where you can retire, and that's the problem that we're solving. As you say, we think of it as an easy one because you go, well, just sell that property and you just squash that debt and away you go. But it's normally the case where that's a source of stress or an issue there that causes anxiety rather than necessarily a problem. That's another good example of that. I always joke about my parents that are now retired. My father, for about the first 3 years when they were retired, would say to me, just don't really know what we're going to do for money this year. And he just couldn't get his head around the fact that you have enough in retirement savings to retire. That's what you will do for money this year, is you will draw a retirement income. That's how that works. And so the problem had been solved. The issue of, have I got enough for retirement? What does enough mean? Yes, you have that amount of money, and yes, you can draw that income that you need to live on every year. The problem had been solved, but the emotional side of it took years for him and my mother to work through that and kind of be at peace with the idea that they didn't need to accumulate or stress or worry about whether they had enough. They'd already solved the problem, they'd already reached the goal. So it's an interesting one.
I like to use a term with my clients that are newly retired or approaching retirement, that their money now gets dressed and goes to work for them. It's a really, really hard concept to get your head around, because you're looking at zeros and ones and twos on a statement. But that is the concept of it. Like you need to actually start thinking in that specific thing about your money getting dressed and going to work for you.
It's probably a good example of one where, if your clients raise this with you, Michael, you'd probably be more understanding and empathetic and think about it. Because it's my parents, I just went, stop being crazy. You're retired. Don't worry about it. But it makes a really good point, is that you can't approach those financial problems with the view of the problem has been solved, therefore there is nothing to stress about. But I think that's, I guess, like I said, when you come to that point where it's not really a problem that needs to be fixed, it's more about changing your perspective or changing how you think about that and the way that you feel about it.
Wrapping up?
Yeah, I think that's as you say, I've struggled at times to explain the concept of this book to yourself and on this podcast, but that's the big one for me is whenever you feel a source of anxiety around money or around your finances, is that I'd encourage you to actually dig a bit deeper and really work out what that means for you. What is it that you're actually stressed about? Is it a problem that needs to be fixed? And if so, how can you solve that problem? Or is it just a source of stress or a source of anxiety for you? In which case, is there a different perspective a way that you can look at that differently or think about that differently so that it's not causing you that ongoing stress?
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Money Over 50 podcast with Lighthouse Financial Advisors. We look forward to catching up again soon.